What's up, Coaching Collective? Welcome back to call number, I think this is call 19, 18 or 19. And today we have another incredible guest that I'm so honored to represent or to introduce. This is Chelsea Cross. She is our registered dietitian on staff, and she's going to be doing an incredibly important presentation on eating disordered habits in clients. So Chelsea, I'm going to mute myself. Take it away, girl.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited.
I want to note real quick that Lauren, Sean, and I ordered food and are starving, and it just got here, so we're probably going to be eating during this presentation. I just want everybody to know that and be very transparent.
It's all about eating today, so it's all good. One thing, did you give me? Can I screen share, or do I need to be switched over?
You are in control.
All righty, perfect. So thank you again, though, for having me. I'm actually really honored that you asked me. It makes me feel like special and like I'm important. So I appreciate it. Yeah, so hello, everybody. I'm excited to kind of just chat about disordered eating today. So I don't know, I want to kind of open the floor first, actually, while I'm opening my presentation. If anyone has any clients on their roster where they're concerned where this is, if this is a thing, if you've had anybody in the past you've kind of had some challenges with, just want to see kind of everyone's background with any form of disordered eating in terms of their roster.
Yeah, I can definitely lead the charge here. I think being just a dominant competition prep coach, and I know a lot of you guys here are competitors, so you know that like disordered thoughts, disordered eating, like really aggressive relationships with food are pretty common in the competition space, especially near the end of a prep and then after a prep. So I've definitely dealt with that a fair handful of times.
For sure. Especially after reversing, it's during the beginning of reverse is hard, really hard. Anyone else at all?
Sean, you don't have to raise.
I don't know why I raised my. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I had a client that she was like, when we started working together, she was just drinking, like she was very adamant about like only drinking like protein shakes. Like she was like, I don't know, she didn't like want to eat. She wanted to like only drink protein shakes. And we've been working together for, I want to say almost 4 months. And we started her off just like really low. And then we just essentially went through a really slow reverse diet, slowly incorporating more and more food, and more just quality whole foods. And she's been loving it. She's been finally seeing the change and the energy and the strength from it. And it's been successful so far. So we're good.
That's interesting. It reminds me of, I can't remember who it is. Oh, Greg Plitt, who used to do the whole like liquid diet. And he said it just reminded me of that, where you said she was only open to drinking protein shakes. And I remember
I did that program from Greg when I was first starting off. Yeah, it was like 6 protein shakes a day. And then like 4 of them were casein, and you were shitting your brains out, but you were like, I'm going to get shredded.
Yep.
I never got shredded. Never once.
Yeah. I don't know. He looked great. I mean, whatever, but at the same time, he would kind of factor in that our body was supposed to only have liquids, and it was just harder on the body to eat. And I'm like, kind of poor messaging there. But anyways, so yeah, I'm sure that as coaches, we definitely have seen a lot of kind of behaviors where it's like it branches in that gray area. So hopefully throughout this, what I can do is kind of just offer some thoughts and some maybe approaches if you are thinking that there's a potential. Disordered eating can go downhill really fast. So that's why you want to be aware of these things. You want to know how to talk to your athletes, and you also want to catch it. And maybe know where you need to say, okay, I need to step back, and I'm going to lend you support and direct you in that direction, and get you some help that you need if it does start to kind of go downhill where you feel like I don't have control anymore, or it's out of my scope. So kind of to be covered here, I do want to kind of classify the difference between, the different extremes here. So what is disordered? What are eating disorders? Really within our field, what is seen and how maybe we might be perceived as well. And then how we can best approach it, how we can best help. And again, how do we stay in our lane? Also, feel free, please, I like conversation. I like discussing. So you don't need to kind of put up your hand. You can kind of just talk out. I do that though. I always put my hand up. So whatever you feel comfortable with. But I can't see everyone. So just kind of feel free to chat out. But also something to kind of keep in mind is that this is my experience. And I know Nick always disclaims this. This is my experience and what I have seen and what I have found to be helpful. But if there's anybody else who's experienced something else, then please, again, share away. I like this to be a very much a learning and collaborative space. So what is considered disordered? So disorder is a kind of tricky thing to label. There's not really a hardcore definition. You either have eating disorders or you have what is considered normal. And then there is that gray area. So if we kind of consider the end of the extreme here with eating disorders, there's a bunch of different ones. They've now been categorized as eating and feeding disorders. I think they're just trying to open up the realm for, to be honest, insurance. So they're trying to include a lot more disorders in here that can be classified, because unfortunately the way our system works is that people can't necessarily get insured to get help if they don't have a disorder that is kind of categorized or diagnosed. So what you'll see here, the normals like anorexia, bulimia, and binging disorder are kind of the ones that most people are more familiar with. But these categories here also include other ones, including now it used to be EDNOS, but now it's other specified feeding or eating disorder, which is any form of atypical eating. You have other eating disorders as well, which includes pica and rumination disorder. Pica is basically when you eat things that aren't necessarily normal. Some people eat dirt, some people eat flour, chalk. I've seen like harmful things, like people may start consuming gasoline or something like that. And then, oh, sorry.
No, I was gonna comment, like I've seen a show where this girl was like drinking gasoline and you nailed it.
Yeah. So it's kind of, and some actually thoughts is that they're related to either psychological issues, which eating disorders are in general, but also there could be nutrient deficiencies. So people eating chalk or flour, I feel like, I can't remember if it's iron, but they actually kind of pinpointed it to be like, my body just needs something and I don't know what it is. And that's what I associate it with, which is interesting. And then there's ARFID. So ARFID, it's a very tricky disorder. And if you do get someone with avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, probably want to make sure there's definitely a psychologist on hand. They, for whatever reason, there's a lot of food textural issues. They don't eat very much at all. And they're extremely resistant to eating new things because they're literally afraid of it for whatever reason. So if you do have someone who is classified themselves as ARFID, then definitely have a psychologist on point with you. Some other ones that have been recently introduced as disorders, not just like a terminology. We've seen orthorexia, which is that obsession with clean eating. We see anorexia athletica, which may be something that even people in this space may be like, oh, you know, that's a realm of where I could maybe be seen. It's compulsive exercising. And then you have another one, nocturnal sleep eating disorder, which is where you eat excessive amounts of food during the sleeping and waking hours, whether or not they're conscious of it or not. So very interesting. We've got lots of disorders. Like I said, I believe that a lot of these are classified more so now because they're trying to help people get help. And unfortunately, unless you have a diagnosis, it's very difficult to get insurance to cover that sort of help. Any questions with any of the eating disorders?
Yeah, I have one. So for the one where you said like they have like a really, I don't remember which one it was, but they have like an aversion to eating new foods or
ARFID, yeah.
So are you like, let's just say that they're unaware of that. Would you diagnose that by like looking at their food log, like getting a food log from them and then being like, hey, try something else. And they're like, oh, I fucking can't.
Yeah, it'd be very, you would notice it right away. There's definitely something wrong because they have a very, very like a short list of foods and they'll get all the time. If you ask them to try something, they'll be like, I don't like it. It's a textural thing for me. But you'll notice right off the hop from their food log, it's like maybe a handful of foods that they're actually willing to eat. And anything you'll kind of make a mention of, they'll, depending, again, you're not necessarily in person with this person, so it depends on how open they are to communicate, but they will be extremely resilient to trying other things, whether or not they tell you they're afraid of it or not, or they'll just say I don't like it. But you'll have a lot of pushback from them.
So essentially, if you see somebody who has like maybe like 5 foods that they eat and that's it, you're usually gonna, hey, that's kind of a red flag.
For sure, obviously from a number of perspectives, but kind of classifying, again, it's not necessarily our realm to make any assumptions, but it's like, okay, like you kind of dig a little bit more. And that's where you see these red flags, that it gives you opportunities to have conversations, never to be like, I think you have this, but it's more of just like, hey, you know what? I noticed that our variety's down a little bit. I like to get a bunch of nutrients in our diet. So is there a reason why you only have these types of foods? I always kind of come at it a very neutralized, like I'm going to ask questions. I'm curious, as opposed to kind of like, why do you do that? Because then they'll get defensive and they probably just will stop talking to you.
Cool.
Yeah. So some of these things too can come from previous trauma too. If they've had issues or they fear vomiting, that's actually one, I think, reason behind ARFID. If they have issues and they're fearful that I'm going to get sick, or it feels weird in my throat or something like that, a traumatic childhood thing. So yeah, some interesting kind of things to peek out of there. But a lot of eating disorders are actually stemmed in childhood, as most kind of psychological challenges are. Any other questions at all before we go into the gray area? No? Alrighty. Okay, so we have eating disorders, and then we have healthy eating, quote, quote, or normalized eating, but disordered eating. There's not, again, a real definition for this. Again, it kind of lies on a spectrum like anything. So disordered eating is kind of that gray middle area where it's like, could be harmful, but could be perfectly fine. It depends on how people approach it. And it also depends, I think the big thing is, how is it affecting their health and their ability to function as a human being, or their quality of life. So in general, is this, whatever this behavior, is it harming them in any which way? Is it causing them to be anxious in any which way in normal situations that wouldn't make people anxious? Is it impacting their quality of life in the sense that they won't do anything else unless they do that behavior, like compulsive exercising? It gets in the way of you living your life. Is it that they are literally harming their body because they're not eating enough due to, like, again, restrictive eating? So I always kind of look at it from a life quality perspective, but also, of course, health has to be taken into consideration, because there are a lot of things, like maybe restriction is required for some reason, and we don't know that until we kind of dive in. So I don't want anyone to assume. Again, this is where curiosity comes in and opens the door for questions, essentially. So the biggest thing that I always like to highlight is the fact that a number of the risk factors for eating disorders, we all have them. In the fitness space, as someone who is like maybe a little bit more type A, a little bit more, very aware of our body and try to treat it, with respect. There's a lot of people, including in my field as a dietitian, you have the Hayes dietitian, the health at every size, who basically believe that any form of dieting is just completely awful. I'm hurting someone if I ever consider that weight loss is a thing. So it's a difficult thing for me as a dietitian. There literally is the weight loss okay dietitians, and there are you are not allowed to ever think that you need to lose weight ever. You could be 300 pounds. No, you do not lose weight. It's not acceptable. So we, as people in the fitness space who do go through periods of dieting or help people, change their body composition, and have those characteristics like that perfectionism potentially, or very routine orientated, or saying, hey, like I need to fit my lift in today instead of maybe going out first. Those could be considered disordered by some people or some professionals, because they're like, oh, well, you're rearranging your life to go to the gym or whatever the case is. So I don't necessarily see these things as a problem. I don't think that these specific qualities that are risk factors for eating disorders definitely mean that you have an eating disorder. It's just something to be aware of. And when you have someone who is showcasing a lot of these symptoms or these characteristics, then just kind of keep an eye on them, because it can, again, be manifested in other ways. So yeah, it's not that this is be all end all, they're going to have an eating disorder, but also considering yourself and say, what type of traits do I have? And maybe how does that manifest in myself? And maybe that also gives you an opening to understand other people who share those same characteristics. So I wanted to kind of bring up some red flags. And again, this is a big disclaimer that not all of these means that people have an eating disorder or something like that, but it's just more so that when they start to cluster together, maybe you have that high risk personality type and you start to see these types of things. Again, it kind of is a curiosity thing. Now, the first thing you could actually do is there are a bunch of eating disorder inventory screening tools that you can definitely use. And as a coach, if you are feeling like you ever miss some signs and you're like, okay, well, I feel like now this is out of my scope. They've already paid me. Oh, this is an awkward, icky situation. Then maybe one thing to do in a waiver is to also include that if they have disordered eating mentioned or a relationship with food issue, if they speak about it, then maybe it's something to attach. There is actually the eating disorder inventory, which I think it's like a 25 question questionnaire. You add it all up and it kind of puts their risk factor there and you can kind of get an idea. So it could just be something to use. Sorry?
You have that
I
question?
can, yeah, you can actually, I don't have it on me, but it's an easy download and you have the shortened version. And basically it's like a screening tool that they use, I think, in like doctor's offices and stuff like that. So it can definitely be used easily.
When I post this video in the Facebook group, will you post it in the comments for people?
Yeah, I could definitely. So it's called the EDI and I think it's been changed a couple of times. It's not the full version, but the full version is like 100 questions. So that definitely wouldn't be something that people want to do. But the short version is definitely useful.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, just again, to disclaim, not all of these mean that we need to be like, oh my gosh, but it's just, again, something that adds up. If you get multiple things over and over again, then something to maybe be aware of. The first thing though, is actual high risk situations. So before even thinking about the person, think about the situations that they may be in or, experiences they may be having. So post show, as Nick mentioned, a big one, that people are a high risk factor for binge eating most commonly, but I also see that some people end up continuing restriction or being afraid to let cardio go because they want to keep that body that they work so hard for. And it's become a control mechanism. So post show, you have to kind of have your back up a little bit, being like, all right, we need to talk about this like 8 weeks out. This is what we're going to do. Remind them like 6 weeks out, 4 weeks out. The newer they are, the more we should talk about it because they have no idea what they're in for until they actually do it. And even when they're like, yeah, I'm ready. You've told me this all, yada, yada. But then the second they feel that hunger, it's like, wow, I didn't realize that and I wasn't ready for it. So just kind of make sure that you prepare them as much as possible. Jobs and bodies or jobs and hobbies that basically require a lot of body observation or reliance on our bodies, like, again, influencers and coaches and trainers. And I don't know if you've ever had a dancer or something like that, then these are big jobs where their body is highlighted a lot of the time. And so they may have that need to fit into certain body shapes. And so again, they're more of a risk to want to control that and potentially do things if that is at risk for them. Traumas, breakups, stressful situations. This is one thing, again, that people will always have a way of coping. If you've had someone in the past who have had eating disorders in the past, their coping mechanisms are to control and restrict. So in the case of a breakup, say someone is recovered, what are their coping mechanisms? Have they learned new ones to get through trauma? Have they learned how to approach emotions in a positive way? If they haven't, their eating disorder behaviors will come back to save them. So just again, being mindful of if they tell you, in my past, I had an eating disorder, then if something happens, they have a major breakup or an accident or an illness or something where suddenly they can't train or it's very stressful, those might come back to help them get through that situation. And yeah, that's the last point, essentially. Just watch the eating disorder history. Any questions with that at all? No.
Like when you said that they're like more, it's like, did you just find that people who have had eating disorders before, even if they're fully recovered, if they're going through something traumatic, they almost always default back to some form of disordered eating as a coping mechanism?
Yeah. So even personally, I have to watch myself. So I had an eating disorder when I was 16. And so I noticed, especially even like a couple years previous, like I don't think the eating disorders are ever recovered. It's more about you're in control. Mm-hmm. But I do find majority of people don't actually fully take advantage of like psychology and psychologists and whatnot and trying to assess stressful situations and learn how to better cope. So as we know, we all have an ability to try to run from our emotions, and a lot of people use food as a method of controlling, whether that's not eating or overeating. And so when they've used that in the past and that has helped them in that time, that's the only thing they know. So if they haven't learned anything else, then that will come back because we don't know what else to do. And most people are not going to confront really hard emotions. Naturally, we try to run away from it, and that'll be what comes out.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Very. Any other questions at all? Nope. All right. So Red flags. I on my questionnaire, I don't know how everyone's check-ins are and stuff with their clients, but I always have a body image question. So I use this as a probe and kind of a mental health kind of check-in in terms of how often they're mentioning the language they use, all of these things. Again, if someone says like, I feel fluffy this week, you don't have to be like, oh my God. But at the same time, if it's multiple times through the check-in, or they have this huge long paragraph about how I have like my body, I hate the way I look, it's absolutely terrible, I wish it would change, like all these things, then again, curiosity, start asking about that and start having that in the back of your mind to watch it. If it's multiple weeks over and over and over again, no matter how much work you do, it's still like, I hate my body sucks, then talk about it. We need to kind of reframe those thoughts and actually understand, like, why are we talking about ourselves in this way? Is this habitual? Is it just, that's how I talk about it and I don't even think about it? Or are they actually stressing about this on a daily basis? The other thing I do notice, especially when people are very hyper aware of their body or hypercritical, is for females around their cycle. They'll often kind of make an excuse or like apologize, like, oh, I'm sorry about my pictures, I look bloated, or like, I don't know, they say a lot of things. Some will say like, oh, I know I'm bloated, this sucks, or I hate my period because I'm always bloated. And it's like, this is very normal. Like some degree of bloating and body change is normal around your period, but they're just so hyper aware and they think they look terrible because they're not in their normal shape. So I think that's another thing to actually rationalize what is normal, and it's okay for your body to change and to fluctuate. Looking at their tracking. So a big thing for us with coaches is a lot of the red flags you would see more in person. You see behavioral changes and whatnot, but we don't really have these things, which is why we start to kind of look at questionnaires and tracking. So one thing as well that I typically see for people who are very kind of over obsessive potentially with food is that they zero at everything. There's never a day where it's like even 1 gram off. I'm like, is that actually real? And they're like, yeah, like I just think it's easier to make sure that it's completely, zeroed out. So that's a little bit of a, okay, that's interesting. They have zero food variety, as we touched on with ARFID, but also just they're safe foods. So if there is someone, again, with a history of eating disorders and you see that they're really averse to trying new things, it could just be that the food they eat now, they're totally fine with increasing that. But you bring in anything else, like, no, that's scary because it's not their safe foods anymore. Random weight spikes. This is something like weight loss you would see. It's not going to be like suddenly overnight they drop 10 pounds. But if on the scale, they don't tell you and they're like, hey, I didn't binge or anything like that, but you can see like a random, like, whoa, okay, we've gone up a lot suddenly. And there's a stressor, then again, don't approach it as, did you binge? But it's more about that's again, like, hey, what, just looking at that, just want to make sure digestion's okay. Like you can kind of circulate it around with other ways of asking, like what happened, as opposed to being like, did you overeat? It's more about, I want to make sure digestion's okay, because sometimes our weight fluctuates or like jumps because of that. Macro hoarding at night is a big thing as well that I tend to see. People are so afraid, especially previous dieters, of going to bed hungry, that literally you will see in their food diary, it's like, okay, we have like 1/3 of our calories at nighttime. And I'm like, is there a reason we do that? We're not feeding ourselves to go to bed. I'm not saying we don't eat anything. We need to fuel our body throughout the day, but I just kind of jump in there as a, why do we choose to have this percentage of our food at nighttime, as opposed to our training? We want to make sure we're fueling that. And then they often will be like, well, I'm afraid that I'm going to be hungry. So then it kind of opens again that conversation of those fears from previous dieting potentially. And the last thing, I don't know if anyone else recognizes or kind of gets this a lot, is that I do find people who have dieted a lot, they tend to really go for sweets and they tend to go for artificial sweeteners a lot. A lot of my clients who have had eating disorders or disordered eating in the past, they have a really hard time having savory meals. A lot of their meals are sweet. Like I'm talking, like they have 5 meals, like 4 meals. Like I'm struggling to get a savory meal into them because they just want sweet all the time. And they use a lot of artificial sweeteners, no matter how high their food gets, even to the fact that like I'm bloated, but I still can't give it up because I want that volume and that calorie free. So it's something to be mindful of.
Chels, I'm gonna have to go back and find it. I'll post it in the Slack channel for you guys. But I read this like psychological study they did with food sources and like when people crave certain things, and it was like when people were craving sweets, they were actually like psychologically and emotionally craving to be loved, and if people were going more towards like crunchy foods. They were craving like power and control in their lives and things like that. And it was a super interesting study. I'm gonna have to go back and find it and post it for you guys because it was unreal. It was
Yeah.
really cool.
That totally makes sense. And I mean, at the end of the day, sweets, whether it's artificial or not, it highlights that same pattern, like that same dopamine, which is the same thing we get from connection, right? Sex and hugging and kissing, all of those things, they light up the same pathway. And so people do associate, especially when, again, if they're dieting and they feel some form of a stress, that these sweet foods have given them that little high. So it's the same as like drugs. A lot of people who maybe get addicted to drugs is because they have some form of like connection issues or trauma that they just need that fix constantly. And that's what sweet does essentially for a lot of people. But that's super cool, the whole crunchy and power thing.
Really
I'm gonna mow my way through that food, and that makes me my powerful self.
it's
And then the last one in terms of like just basics here is exercise. So if you have like a waitress or I don't know, someone working at a bar or something, they're like running all over the place. Like it makes sense that they may have high step counts. You have to obviously account for that. But if they're a student or like a coach or something, and you see step counts at like 2,200 or something per day or 20,000, sorry, like that's a lot. I know a lot of online coaches, like I don't move all day long. Meanwhile, you have like some people who like running marathons. Freaking, it's like, okay, what's going on here? What is all the stepping? And then also, even if they're sick or they have some form of something that they should be resting, whatever the case is, or you flag to them being like, hey, your body's showing some really big signs of stress. Let's take a little bit of a rester this week, or maybe we'll take an extra rest day this week. And they're like, no, I'm fine. I'm good. So even though you see their body like retaining water or showing signs of stress in any which way, they just can't do it. And then also with protocols, if you ever have a client who potentially there's a functional issue that you find out from blood work, and you're like, hey, like we got to take some downtime here, or something, if they lost their period for a little bit, and you're like, hey, we got to, reduce our training down. They're like, no, it's fine. Sometimes they won't tell you, sometimes they'll lie to you, but I would hope that, they do feel connected enough where they're going to be honest. And then you will see that in their tracker, but they may kind of really, they'll have that back and forth being like, oh, I don't feel like I can do that. Or like, oh, I'm fine. But just exercise is something that some people, again, they use it as a control mechanism and they're like, it's my stress relief. But Jolie, really challenge that because it's really not a stress relief at all. It's adding stress on the body. It's a mental break, but not a stress break, if that makes sense. So kind of, I always like to really make sure that I emphasize that to clients because I get that a lot. Be like, it's my stress relief. It helps me. No, it doesn't. It's your mental break, but it's actually adding stress to the body when your body's already stressed out. And then they don't like me very much in that moment because I then drop it down a little bit. But any questions with any of those at all? No. Okay, so kind of jumping into how to help. Again, could be other ways, other methods. This is kind of what I tend to do most of the time and kind of more generalized things. So as I've kind of mentioned throughout this, be curious. A lot of these little things, they may not be this person has an eating disorder, but it's a red flag and it's something for you to be curious about and never come at them in more of a way of like, I think you have a problem, but it's more about just be curious, ask them about these things, especially when you know they're already a little bit at risk. So I always like to educate too on basic things that I know a lot of people struggle with, like their free meals. Ask them like, hey, what does a normal free meal look like to you? And when you have people who are dieting, I know what they're going to say, but I just like to hear it from them so that then I can talk about it more. Maybe they're like, hey, it's like, I get to go off my protocol. I get to eat whatever I want. I don't really care about how I feel. Some people actually say like, I eat until oblivion on my free meals. It's like, all right, let's talk about that. So it just kind of allows you to kind of have those conversations candidly and just in a friendly kind of supportive, trusting manner instead of kind of being like, hey, I see a problem. Let's address that. With reverse diet clients, I did mention this as well before. It's more about just be very diligent. The more new they are, if they have had any disordered eating in the past, be extremely on top of them, but also give them alternates. Because I think too, when you have a perfectionist, you have a type A personality, you give them the plan. They're like, this is the plan. If I don't do it exactly, I failed. And then it just exasperates the sometimes emotional component of it. So also say like, hey, you know what, this is our generalized idea. No reverse is perfect. We try our best. This is why we're doing it. So explain to them why it's safer to do things slow as opposed to just like jumping right back into things. Have them be focused on other goals, but also be ready that if someone is really struggling, that you may need to pick up the pace. And even if that means them putting on a little bit of body fat safely, of course, not to the point where like, you know, you get heart arrhythmias or weird electrolyte shifts or anything like that. But if you need to pick up the pace and they end up gaining a little bit of extra body fat, like it is what it is. It's just that they're going to be much more safer as opposed to falling into binge eating and restricting and that guilt and shame cycle that's really hard to get back from, as opposed to kind of just saying, you know what, we're just going to speed this up a little bit. They'll recover a bit faster. Yeah, they may put on a little bit of body fat, but I also think that a lot of people feel this whole like, I can only gain a certain amount post show. And I think that really F's over a lot of people. They get so stressed about it. They see their weight climbing. And then that's when you start to see a lot of push and pull and binge eating starts happening, is when they're like, oh my God, like, you know, I heard previously that I'm only supposed to gain such and such weight after show. And it kind of freaks them out. So, and then the big thing is just making sure that they know you're there for them. Be like, I'm here. I know this is a really hard time. So if you ever need to talk, just let me know. We will have these conversations and there is no shame. There's no guilt. And if anything happens, you do not compensate and you don't feel guilty about it. Talk to me. Let me know what's going on so I can help you through it. Any questions with that at all? No? Okay. Other things, I am a big pusher, and a lot of my clients know me as someone who just constantly kind of just picks a little bit, asks all the questions, makes them think too much. They love me, hate me for it, but I just, you know, I think it's a good thing. They always say at the end of the time, it's good, but I want you to challenge their negative thoughts. So as I said, with that body image question, if they constantly just say like, I'm fat, or I'm this in very negative tones, I challenge that. And I literally will check out every single one. And because I do looms for my check-in, I will literally highlight it and be like, this is what you say. Can we say something different? Because our body and our mind, they live off of what we tell it constantly. And so would you want to live in a body where it's like you're constantly berating yourself all the time? No. So we want to challenge those. And we want to habitually start making them think positive and also building themselves up as opposed to tearing themselves down. Another thing, if they're constantly saying something negative, it could just be that their sense of self is just really broken at that point. They may have had years of other people telling them or themselves telling them that they're not good enough or they're not going to be doing something in the world. So that opens up the door for me to start asking, like, how do you feel about yourself as a person? Because typically their body, they project that insecurity of, I don't feel fulfilled, I don't feel good as a person onto their body. And they're like, well, if I just fix my body, I will be better as a person. Doesn't work that way. Your body basically is like your canvas. You're just kind of spewing all your emotions on and thinking that if I just, you know, work this out in a way that I think is right, then suddenly I will feel the best I will ever feel. It never works out that way. So it's always kind of building that self-esteem as well as a coach. Journal prompting. I'm a huge advocate of journaling. If it works for someone, I very much, you know, get people to journal, especially around like meals. If they're scary for people, journal about it. If they have a hard time with free meals, journal about it. If you have a hard time about, you know, giving compliments to yourself or being proud of yourself or expressing gratitude, like journal about it, because it allows for that safe space. I think that some people feel really uncomfortable with sharing their feelings, but if I talk about journals as this is your own little box. You don't have to share anything with anyone else. But what it does is it allows you to bring the thoughts onto paper so they're not like going crazy in your head and becoming bigger. And it allows you to see everything, organize them. And maybe when you're ready, you can then adjust them and kind of say, okay, I'm going to deal with that one right now. You don't have to tell anyone about it. And I have heard that it has helped with a lot of people. And then you can also kind of give them prompts as well, being like, okay, well, this person really struggles with confidence, or this person really struggles with fear of failure, or whatever. You can send them journal prompts and they'll kind of do and work on that on a daily basis. And it can kind of help them dig deeper and then empower themselves, hopefully, because these prompts are supposed to lead into, I'm empowering myself and I'm becoming a more confident person or version of myself. Also addressing triggers is a big thing. So if you notice certain things that tend to really exasperate stress, then tackle those. That could be something that they journal about. That can be something you really kind of every single week be like, okay, this person's really stressed out at work. how's your work going? Ask about it all the time and just keep trying to inch in there that they are in control and they can make changes. They don't have to sit there and be like, I just can't do anything about it. This job I hate it. I'm going to sit here forever and hate my life. Address those triggers and kind of, again, try to put them in the driver's seat that they can make change. And you are the one, you're trying to lift them up. You're trying to help them to see that they can make little adjustments to make things feel better for them. But also a lot of people struggle with social media as well. And that can be a trigger for a lot of people, whether they think about it or not. So I have a rule with my clients where they do not scroll first thing in the morning. They also don't scroll at nighttime. And especially if they're having stress times where they're more likely to start maybe comparing themselves. There's also going to be, how often you scrolling? I literally ask them because they're like, oh, I'm doing it more often. We tend to have this like requirement, almost like we want to see other people doing things. And it's almost like we're self-sabotaging ourselves or just talking ourselves down even more. I don't know. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a very negative sense that we go to social media more when we're feeling bad about ourselves. And then it just makes ours feel even worse. So I avoid the scrolling as much as possible. And then also in proper context, be vulnerable yourself. People have to realize that we're not robots. We're not like this up here and you're down here. Clients want to be on the same page. They're going to be much more likely to open up to you if you share and you're vulnerable too. Again, you don't want to be sharing your whole story with them every single time you have a check-in, but if it's relevant, like I've shared my personal experiences with eating disorders when I feel like it's necessary with a client. If they're struggling, like, hey, I was there too. Or I share certain things like relationship struggles or whatever, if that is something that's relevant to them and they feel lost or alone. Because the second you make them feel that they're not the only one going through this, they're much more likely to open up and you could probably connect with them a lot more. Any questions with that at all? Anyone else? Like, I know, Nick, you're a journaler. You get a lot of people that kind of journal and open up their thoughts, but is there anyone else who uses journaling as a way to help clients through things? I see some hands. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I love journaling. Again, it's people's safe space. If they refuse to see a therapist, well, then they can get a journal and have their own little pocket therapist, as you will.
I also try to explain to my athletes when they're journaling that when you're trying to think about things, you have an ego attached to it, and it'll a lot of times block you from getting to the truth. But your body usually will know the truth, and your body can disassociate from the mind when you start writing. So usually when you write, you'll uncover more than what you're trying to just think about in the first place.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it kind of it lines up. I think it was a conference or whatever that I was listening to a little while ago. It's more about the relaxation aspect, but she had mentioned the fact that why gratitudes are really important is because you actually can't do multiple things at the same time. So you can't feel bad or horrible if you're actually expressing gratitude. And then also when you have them in your head, you're much more likely to blow things up because they're just getting bigger and bigger and you can't organize them effectively. So like you said too, like all of these things, when you get it out on paper, it's just so much easier to be able to like, okay, I see everything. That's irrational. I can deal with that. Or like, that's something small. Like maybe everything is too big and you just have to pick something. So by having it all out on the paper, maybe I'm not going to deal with all of that at once, but I also stop combining it all into one big burst of a bubble. And like, I can deal with these pieces all at once too. And as for journal prompts, I kind of wanted to post this up. I've sent this to a couple of my clients as well. I mean, you can easily Google different journal prompts, but I liked this one in particular for body image in particular, because it kind of assesses all forms of the body. So like these top 3 ones, like what do my body needs? Like what does my soul need? What does my mind need? And it kind of reminds people that they're more than just their physical appearance. It's like, I actually need to nourish every aspect of me. But it also is like, I should be kinder to myself, or like, I deserve this right now, or what do I need in this moment? So just some things maybe to kind of, you can always send to clients if they're like, I don't even know what to journal about. I just sit there and have a blank page in front of my face. I don't know. A lot of clients need prompts. So have maybe some in mind and kind of dictate them a little bit towards what they need, whether it is, again, body image, confidence, taking a leap of faith, like all of these things, that fear of failure, then kind of look those ones up in particular, and maybe that'll help them in their certain roadblock, if you will. So I wanted to also put in just a couple extras here on specifics. Now, binge eating is very common in our space. And again, especially after shows. So I wanted to kind of do a little bit of specific piece on this guy. So with binge eating, my typical thing here is I have to assess how mild or severe it is. So binge eating is also a very thrown around term. It's like, oh my God, I binged last night. It's like, well, did you? I typically, the first things first is that language matters. And I definitely have this conversation with every single client. The second they mention binge, I'm like, all right, let's make sure we're on the same page here. This is what a binge is. And then this is what I overate or I emotionally ate. And most of the time they're like, oh yeah, I just like, I knew what I was doing. I was in control. It was an emotional piece. So I'm like, all right, cool. Because the only reason why I want to do that is so you don't put yourself in a box, because binging is very, very large. It kind of seems like, oh my God, I have something wrong with me. But a binge, that's a whole other territory. And that also allows me to take my approach. So when it comes to more so overeating, emotional eating, I like to use something called the HALT principle. And I can kind of see it off the side there. Is that you kind of have every single time they'll sit down for a meal or going to be eating something, that they actually literally say HALT in their mind. And it allows them to be present in what they're actually feeling. So it's like, all right, go through the list here. And this time, actually, especially if they're feeling emotionally charged and they're the spontaneous thing to do is just food. I don't want to feel this food. It stops them and makes them think for a moment and actually can kind of ground them a bit before they kind of automatically jump to the food. But you ask them basically, are you hungry right now? That's physically like my stomach is growling. I haven't eaten in 5 hours, so it makes sense. And I always say too, if you will eat a carrot, if I gave you a plate of carrots, would you eat it right now? If the answer is no, you're really not that hungry. Or you can also I heard someone say, if you're not in the mood for protein, you're really not that hungry. Because people will always eat carbs. Those are fantastic. But when you say, here, have some chicken, you're like, no, I don't want that. You're not hungry. So true hunger, you will eat anything because your body's like, I need food. I need something. I don't care. Now, the rest of them are all emotions, and they're typically emotions that we don't want to deal with. So A is, they say anger. I use anxiety, but you can kind of go both ways here. Either way, food is something we use to distract from that emotion. People eat, people eat when they're stressed, people eat when they're angry, in that case, and it's that they're trying to avoid that emotion. It doesn't solve anything by distracting you. So by saying, okay, I'm angry, you've kind of said, okay, I'm not hungry right now, I'm angry. You can still go and eat something, but at least you've identified the feeling, and then we reflect back on that. L is lonely. Big thing during COVID. A lot of people struggled with emotional eating because they felt isolated when they were by themselves. So that's another one we typically comfort with food, because again, dopamine rush, that communication or that connection that we're feeling like we're missing. And then the T essentially is tired. I also put boredom in there as well. Food doesn't make you it gives you a little burst of energy potentially, but it's not the origin of why we're tired. And it's also not the thing we do as a hobby when we're bored. You don't just kind of eat. It's not an activity to do when we just have extra space on our hands, or extra time on our hands, if you will. So yeah, it just kind of allows them to be present in their emotions and kind of make sure that they're not just impulsing to food because I'm scared of this emotion. It actually forces them to try to deal with the emotion, which can actually lead them to getting over the emotion a little bit better than the food aspect. Another thing with binge eating or overeating is working on scarcity mindset. So this can take various things. So this could be how they're tracking. Do you need to loosen the macros up? So if someone's really struggling, like, hey, I hit my macros like every single day, but I'm still so hungry afterwards. And when I get close to hitting my target, I feel like I have so much time left in the day, they kind of then sabotage and they'll end up binging. Because like, oh my God, like I'm going to be hungry, and then they emotionally eat, and whatever the case is. So sometimes we need to loosen those targets, whether that becomes all right, we don't track protein or carbs and fats anymore. We just do maybe a protein total and a calorie total and see how that goes. For some people, this means no longer tracking at all, and having as a coach to be able to do that. I know sometimes as coaches, we're like, well, what do I do if I can't have them tracking macros? Like, how do I see their food? There's other ways to do it. Sometimes they can't have any numbers in there right now just because it's too much and they start fixating on it. So you kind of refocus them on balance in their meals. And you could do journaling for that too. What I typically use is an app called the Rise and Recover app. And it's actually like a food journal. So it's just, you write down the food instead of numbers. It's like, I write down, I ate an apple, or I ate this. And then it has a little journal prompt right beside it. So you write down your emotions while you're eating. And so they can take a screenshot of that and send that to me, or I get them to send me pictures of their meals and be like, all right, so tell me what you had here. Tell me what the carb is. Tell me what the fat is. Tell me what the protein is. What I'm trying to do is make sure that one, they're getting their nutrients, but also two, I'm putting them back into this is food. It's not just, not just like numbers. So that's what I'm trying to rework for that piece when I kind of do that. But you do have to address the fact that a number of people, when they binge eat, a lot of it is because they have this idea that I can't eat something. And so they end up eating it anyways because of that emotionally charged connection with it. Keeping their environment safe. This is also another one that's kind of hit or miss with people, but I always try to keep them as safe, but I still want to challenge them. I don't want to just say, okay, we'll get rid of it all, because that may not be helpful for people. That's not really addressing the problem. So say they had an issue with cereal and like, you know what, no matter how much, whatever cereal is, I just have to eat it. If it's in the house, I will eat it. Well, if it's a case of doesn't matter what it is, or like if it's a horrible cereal they don't even like, but they still can't control themselves around it, okay, maybe it's a time where we have to remove it from the house because it's taunting them. And it's just kind of creating that stress. So we'll work on the feelings, but we bring it back in doses. But there's also some people who can have a little bit. And so you test that scarcity mindset by saying, okay, you like cereal, plug some cereal into your day every single day. I don't care what day it is. Every single day you have a serving of cereal until you're bored of it. Because what that does is it normalizes it. Because right now the cereal is like, oh my God, this halo food that is special to me. And so I tell myself I can't eat it, but then when I do, I can't stop. So if they have it every single day, trust me, they will get bored of it eventually. And then it'll kind of disassociate that kind of halo effect on it. So that kind of, again, hit or miss with some people literally can't stop. So you do have to remove it for a little bit while we tackle that. Another thing I've also found too, like with peanut butter, or I think I used this in the other, when I spoke about this before, but the All-American nut butters. A lot of my clients have issues with these. They're super
bane of my existence, dude. Oh yeah. My God.
Yeah. So many people.
I ate of them and I ate 9.
Yeah. So with those, super highly palatable, right? So what I say is, all right, you know what? We're not going to order the All-American nut butters for a little bit. What we're going to do is say, okay, do you enjoy peanut butter? Yes. Do I binge on peanut butter? No. Okay. So we switch over to the peanut butter. You still get the peanut butter. It's not a scarcity thing. I'm not restricting you, but this super highly palatable thing, you can't control yourself over. So let's take it down a notch and remove the excess sweeteners and whatnot in it. So it's not like a tantalizing thing. I've done that with, okay, peanut butter is too much for you. Let's move to almond butter or something more bitter, because it's really hard for them to overeat. They still like it. It's just not their favorite. So it's not that you're taking it away. It's just saying, all right, let's do a little bit more of a slightly less obsessive flavor, I guess, or one that they can't control. And instead we'll work our way back and say, I still have nut butter. It's just not my favorite. So I'll tend to have my serving them good type of thing. You can do the same thing with chocolate. Dark chocolate, like really get them a higher percentage. And so they'll have it and they're like, I can't binge, like this is too much, but I'll still have my chocolate. But if you give them like white chocolate or milk chocolate, they're like, I'll eat the entire bar and the entire box. So kind of just work your way back if you want to. At that point too, their taste buds may change. They may not want the All-American nut butter anymore, where they just actually appreciate natural peanut butter and not one that's filled with whatever stuff. Preventing hunger is another big thing. Big thing for people who suffer with binge eating is the fact that they wait until they're hangry and then they have no control whatsoever. So I make sure that they're eating consistently. They're not doing intermittent fasting. They are eating regularly, and they're eating meals, not snacks. I find that a lot of people, when they are, thinking that I'm going to space my food out more, I'm going to do 3 meals and 3 snacks. Well, they're constantly eating. So they never feel fully satisfied because there's like teeny tiny meals all across the day. They'll have like a rice cake or 2 for a snack. I'm like, what are we doing that for? So you want to have meals fully balanced as much as possible and, regularly enough that they're not going to be feeling excessively hangry all the time, because that kind of puts them at risk. And then there's absolutely, of course, no compensation. If a binge happens, it happened. We have to say, we have to forgive ourselves. It happened. We move on. There's no, oh, I have to count that in my tomorrow's macros. Oh, I restrict the next day or do cardio. No, I don't care when it is. If it's post show, if it's not post show, whatever the case is, there's no compensation. And for people who are struggling, if you see that there's any form of purging, if they're in a dieting phase, it stops. And you have to then take all because again, purging goes downhill really quickly. I've had a client before who went from my relationship with food is a little bit to suddenly that, okay, well, I thought that maybe it'd be good to try to make myself throw up. And it's like, no, no, no. And then everything kind of stopped. So they feel sometimes that they have control and they're like, I'm fine. I can definitely go into a cutting phase. I'm healed, all of these things. But again, because they're not in front of you, you learn as you go and you see how they're responding. I'm glad that she was open about that with me. And then I explained, okay, we're going to take a different direction right now because that's not okay. Yeah, you have to kind of be aware that these things can take an ugly turn really quickly. So yeah, just kind of something, if dieting has to stop, it is what it is. You explain to them why and kind of give them some form of like, let's look at this for a different goal. And we're going to focus on this now. Clearly outline it so they feel comfortable. Any questions at all with that stuff? No. Actually, one thing I did forget with the trigger foods, one thing that I do like to do instead of like trialing, sometimes you have the trigger foods come in, you're like, I want to trial this and see how it goes, just to kind of, again, take that halo off of it. Always make sure it's in the context of a meal. Don't have it by itself. Do not tell them to eat a bowl of cereal all by itself. Make sure they have it with a meal and then explain to them it's because I want you to feel full. So you're in control and you have your cereal and it's good. And as opposed to having it on an empty stomach where it's like, we know cereal doesn't keep you full. So what's going to happen when they still feel hungry after they've done their one bowl of cereal? Well, they're going to have another one and another one. And it's going to be like, well, I failed. So make sure you kind of keep it in the realm of a meal. So they're actually full, they have their treat, and then they move on. Just another kind of random piece. So the final thing is promotion of a healthy body image. So this is another big one. I kind of already touched on this a little bit before, which is a lot of disordered behaviors and just control mechanisms are typically they say my body image kind of sucks, but at the same time, it's more about the inside of them doesn't feel good. And I like to kind of highlight again that there are different aspects of body image, that we want to kind of address here. But my big focus is on building them up as a person and making sure that they are doing things in their life that are actually fulfilling. And there's a lot of people who live their life on like someone else, and they're never doing anything for themselves. And so no wonder that they kind of feel like a shell of themselves, and they think that they need to control something else to kind of make themselves feel better or in power when they feel like they're powerless over everything else. So I like to kind of get in there. Promoting healthy body image is about promoting themselves as a person, making sure you're happy in your life. Again, challenging the negative thought patterns and the negative language. I basically have we do not use the F word at all when we refer to ourselves. I don't care about fluffy. I don't care about fat, all of those things. I don't use those terms because it's not productive. There's no reason other than bringing ourselves down to say that. So I don't allow my athletes to say that, and I will call them out every single time. Also normalizing normal body functions. As I said, women on their cycles, it's not that, oh, my period is here and now I get to feel fluffy for a week. Be grateful for the fact that you have a normal cycle. That's not common. That's not like a given ever. And it's okay. It's okay that our body is a little bit like holding a bit of water one day. That's not a bad thing. It's just that it's different. It's not bad. It's just different. And so getting to the nitty gritty of it's okay to have different things happening. Bloating also is a big thing that people tend to get over kind of concerned with. I find, of course, if it's very, very bad bloating, that's one thing, but like a bloat, I like to explain again to clients that this is your body trying to tell you something. So that means you need to listen and say, okay, what's going on? Why am I bloated? It's just my body saying, hey, there's something not right and I need you to fix it. But I'm trying to tell you this, you need to pay attention to me. As opposed to being like, I feel fat because I'm bloated. Again, just people automatically go to negative without actually thinking about why that's happening in the first place. And as I said, the most important piece is building up themselves and making sure that they see themselves in a much more positive and fulfilled way is really helpful for promoting healthy body image. Because at the end of the day, we should be appreciative of our body at every single stage. And it should never just be about the exterior, but typically, again, when the internal is hurting, we will take it out on the external. So you want to fix the internal because the external won't fix that, if that makes sense. And so the final thoughts, As I said, everything kind of runs on a spectrum. This is a very gray area. So just kind of keep that in mind, but these are kind of red flags that you can look at and kind of look at for more communication. The big thing is that these clients, they do maybe need a little bit more love, a little bit more support. Be very careful around your own language when talking to them. So being careful with what types of words you use. Like, don't necessarily, if you have someone who you're trying to get away from talking about their body, don't ask for, their pictures every single week, and don't be comparing their shots or be like, hey, you look bloated this week. Like, try to kind of keep away from that as far as like what you're talking about, and keep on the things that your goal is right now is to help their relationship with food. So really keep their focus on that and make sure that you do set boundaries for how they continue to talk about certain things. As I said, be persistent with their language, and then help them plan. So there's, things that they can feel a little bit nervous about, or again, that they don't feel like they have full control over. So if free meals is a problem for them, help them plan that out. Be like, hey, you know what? You're going to go out this week and it's a set date in front of you. Like, let's go over that. Let's go over what you want to do all throughout that day to make yourself, as prepared and full as possible. And then you go and you have a great time. Help them with that. So not just kind of saying you have a free meal every single week, go for it, challenge yourself, like help them. They're challenged in this way, and it's our job to be there to kind of guide them through this, and then they won't need our help with that anymore. But you don't want to set them up for failure either, because it's going to set them back like 4 paces. So just a little bit extra love and care on that end. So I think that is it. I've talked your ear off for I think like an hour now. But hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Any questions? Now I did see that the chat popped up, but I wanted to wait towards the end. Oh, thank you. Emma said, love that. Thank you.
So you want to click stop sharing screen, and then we'll all pop up as faces.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Chelsea. That was amazing. That really was.
Perfect.
Not talked about enough. I mean, personally, I feel like you covered everything super well and super in depth. But if anybody else has any questions, feel free to ask right now. And so that was a pretty full encompassing thing. So that's a great job as a presenter, dude.
Thank you. I feel like I over talk sometimes, but maybe, hey, if no one has any questions and I covered everything, that's maybe a good thing.
And on a coaching collective call, oh my God, I don't shut up. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording.